All right. So this is a little late, but I was traveling around in Europe, and the only event kind of between the Pro Tour and and kind of going home was Brussels. But because that was in Team Sealed, I figured I just wait till I got home to do this. Kind of do this as a memo of how Marvel Superheroes Limited was. It's a little bit of a combination of two previous sets that we have looked at, A for Drift and Edge of Eternities, and we'll kind of get into that. But basically, I'm just going to recap the process we got for the Pro Tour. So those were two presentations. This first one, the preliminary, is usually a lot shorter. However, because the set has been out for 2.5, 3 weeks at this point, there was a lot of data on the set, a lot of known metagame, a lot of information, so it's a lot more dense than usual. And it was important to communicate it so that our team is always like kind of on the same basis. So that's why it's more dense, is so that the team is going off the same, is understanding where the format's at, right? Because knowing where the format's at is important before we start pod drafts. So we're just going to kind of go through it. There's a lot of slides. I'm probably not going to stop on each of these to make this video not like a ton of hours long. If there's material in one of the slides that interests you, and you can always pause and check it. So anyway, so this is a preliminary presentation. This is what I do. So this time, interestingly, we also had a sister team. So I was streaming this to them, but they were in another house. So the mission statement I gave was to become the mastermind. I usually just try something humorous to get people in the right flow of mind. But a lot of it was, my guess was that for this Pro Tour, because the draft was top 8 and there was a lot of time, that we would face kind of a more psychological approach to the format than a pure execution approach. And that's where this comes from. So for me, one of the big things that matters is perception. Funny, I mean, it's like you look here at the meta share on 17 lands, right? This comes from a site called Limitless, but fundamentally it's based off the 17 lands data, and like white blue is the first deck about like double over the next one, which is also white. So there's this perception, right, that white blue is the best archetype, barring none. It was important to get the team on board with this perception that the heroes are winning over the villains and all that stuff. So it's talking about how the set worked. If you haven't played Marvel Superheroes or watching this like a little later, it's basically a straight up 2-color set, but splashing a for color is relatively trivial. The best cards are the best cards. They don't really, there's not really an archetype identity. It's pretty weak on that side. So as a result, that's why splashing works. You have land cyclers. A lot of the best cards are just single pip up, so quite easy. The big thing is that white is performing the best at because the common cluster is really good, and the rares and mythics are very powerful, while a lot of the commons and uncommons at red just don't function. So it's not even a problem at red of the color being underdrafted or being too weak. It's just a lot of the cards just aren't usable. At least at first glance, right? We're doing these pod drafts to check this stuff, but yeah. And then the main thing about the set for me is that having a board presence is important. So I use this. We had a camp for kind of I think a magic camp for kids that we went through. I used the slide with them, but like it really is emblematic of how red is in the set. Doesn't mean all these cards are unplayable. It is a problem that how little you can actually use them. I mean, Team Tactics, to be fair, was in the Pro Tour winning list, and I used it too in the top 8. So it's not like these cards were totally unusable. Just that floor, a lot of them were having trouble. So then talk about the color strength and draft. Keep this. I removed most of the first week. Keep this relatively simple because I didn't want to color perception too much in the preliminary. Just talk about where things were at, which is essentially that the blue-white archetype was far and above the others. But then most of the archetypes were kind of the C, D tier. So like still usable to a degree. I talked to them as well about the evolution, how like even though blue-white was the most trophy archetype played, etc., it was still down 2% over the first week. And Golgari was going up, which I thought was really important as well to make a highlight. We'll be talking about Golgari a lot in this set. I also separated for top players to give more of a perspective to the team, and like how once you start filtering those archetypes by top players, they are a lot closer together. Um, which I think is kind of a like a preview as to what's going to happen. So, this, if you've watched my materials on Eternities, thank you. You've been watching my content for quite a while then, because I was back when I was streaming rather than recording these for YouTube. But functionally, I mentioned the term clusters. It's probably one of the most important terms I use for discussing modern limited. So, cluster. So if you think of archetypes, clusters are essentially sets of cards, so they are kind of within an archetype, right? So if blue white is an archetype, like the commons in white working together are a cluster of cards. The idea of this is to try to identify what's really making the archetype tick. But fundamentally we use this for Edge of Eternities. It was talking about how you just want to make your deck resilient. So I use, again, the same analogy I did with Edge of Eternities, which is this idea that the deck is a ball of rubber bands. You know, you can add to it, that's cool. You can remove some, that's cool too. Nothing really is critical to the deck's functioning, ideally. So this is the insert that they have for Marvel Superheroes Draft. I use this to break the ice effectively. None of this is true functionally. Like, yes, I mean, black-white has an attack alone mechanic, but it's not really what any of this set is about. So this section I'm going to speed run through a bit because it looks at what the metagame is. So I'm looking at the average aggregate trophy deck for each archetype, as well as over and under performance per archetype. This is a lot of dense information if you are interested in Marvel Superheroes Limited. I don't think there's too many events left. I think just the mock's open by the time this video is done. So this is not likely to be super of interest, but you're welcome to stop at any point. I'll just go through them quickly. So yeah, I'm gonna put the aggregate, then over unders. The over under is actually more important, I think, than the aggregate, because it helps on perception of the archetypes and like where equity can be kind of unlocked that people aren't looking at. So also when we're doing pod drafts, it's really important that like we're not doing the same issues that other people have been doing online, right? Because I'm trying to check for Pro Tour players or Pro Tour Draft 2 players. So I don't want our team overrating Spider-Man to the rescue in white decks, as that card has been overrated online, because then we're just repeating the same mistakes and not moving forward. So this is like alignment so that we can get to the truth we need to have. So yeah, I'll go through these and explain. So the black-white aggregate deck is basically often just white cards with some black cards added. The main thing here is that it is really a white archetype, so that's why those black cards like Claw, Bear, and Strucker aren't working. Whereas the cards that are working a little more, like Hydra Infiltration, Whiplash, even Vivid Vision, actually, black-white is a good home for the card. Red-white functionally is a mid-range deck. It ends up that most of the people drafting white-red are in white and then happen to have some red cards to complement. Not the most exciting deck, being frankly honest. So I use this to break the ice and make it clear. But there's a lot of overplayed cards in red-white. Because functionally it's a mid-range deck, right? So a card like Political Triumph is not as good as it should be because you're more about like individual good cards rather than flooding the board. And that's why Herbie and Spy Kid are good in that archetype, and it's not obvious at first glance. Green-white aggregate. This one is more green deck than a white deck. It's the only white archetype that tends to be more green. I talk about overplayed cards, underplayed. I'm going through this fast, but again, this is just because at this point the set's been out a while, and this is really alignment. Rapid Rescue is a big one. Across all the green archetypes, extremely underplayed, and I want to make it clear that we're not passing this card too late. For context, at the Pro Tour, I have seen this card wheel. I have heard from my teammates this card wheeling. So, even when a set's been out a long time and cards are clearly showing strength, like Rapid Rescue, people still struggle to beat those biases and take those cards at the appropriate pick order. So that's, I think, something really important to think about and learn, is that even with as much understanding as you can have, the biasing that people have is just too strong. It's really hard for them to overcome. And that'll become important once we get to the next section, to the presentation I gave on the Wednesday before the Pro Tour. Blue black, which functionally just good cards again. The big thing for blue black is that there's this kind of artifact shell that actually performs well. Dependable Quinjet and Iron Lad. It wasn't like kind of obvious. It wasn't obvious at all. How and it led to like some discoveries around blue black. My intuition was this was the archetype with a good chance to figure out something alternative in it. But yeah, like it doesn't. It's a little counterintuitive that this would be the case, but it ended up that like there's an artifact section of blue black that's good. The blue red deck, again, these are aggregate decks, so once you see rares go into the aggregate, that means the archetype's not drafted that much, or the rares are really important. That's why you see Vision Quest at the bottom. Yeah. Fundamentally, Super Suit was underplayed in most blue archetypes, but blue red had a low card quality density, so that was the one where it made the most sense that it was underplayed. The blue green deck, again, just good cards. Big thing is Titania was underplayed. Yeah, it just a good card that like is underplayed because people don't perceive the card as being good in blue green, so that's kind of fun. Yeah, so again, something to break the monotony, make sure that like the team is like up to speed. One thing you have to realize when I'm doing these presentations is the main thing is I have to give the team I'm teaching a lot of information and align them, right? So like the more tired they are, the less likely they are to retain information. So I need to break the ice. The memes might be terrible, but their core function is to not necessarily elicit a laugh or anything. It's to make their brain stop, so that like they can look. It's kind of like how do you keep this presentation going, because you have 20 people, so you can't really like do a proper break. But like give them functionally mental breaks. So obviously this was for the black red deck. You'll notice there's 2 rares in here, the Wrecking Crew and Avengers Under Siege. And again, for these aggregates, it doesn't mean this is how I would build the deck. It's how people are building the deck. I think that's a really important distinction. I talk about how like essentially the villain side is just massively overplayed, the Assault Robot, Madame Hydra side, and the underplayed section is this Hawkeye's Bow Swordsman side, or Whiplash, right? That's the section that's underplayed. Black green, the aggregate's not as important as the fact that the resolution on this is really bad, but it's all good. That essentially this is by far the archetype with the most undervalued cards. I mean, and also they're undervalued in the sense of like people can't take them. Call damage, control, restorative technique, the Koi ploy are just not really usable in other decks. So you just get them for free because nobody wants them and they're not that strong. So you're in black green, you can just fill your deck up. Like it's just impossible. So that was like one of the important archetypes for us to look at. And then finally red green. The interesting part with red green, apart from the fact that a Wolverine's in there, is that it ended up being a quite interesting archetype for us to learn and discover about. There were a lot of underrated cards, specifically Crimson Operative and Blazing Crescendo. So I'm gonna jump a little bit to the next slides to talk about this stuff. Then I'm aligning them on colorless cards. Any of you can do this by like looking at 17 lands data. I'm not gonna go into it. If you're that interested, you can pause. On the commons or uncommons, it's a lot of info. So I actually told the team that I like, because it's so detailed and so little slides, I told them to look at this later or as we draft, because it's too much effort to look at it like during a presentation. There's too much conditionality. This is important though. This is where I start introducing the concept of like essentially artifact or colorless multicolor cards. Obviously hybrid cards lean that way, right? If you think of Spider-Woman, it goes in 7 archetypes, so it's closer to an artifact than it is a main color card. And that's actually something to like, when you see hybrid cards, it's really important to differentiate them that way. And then I discussed this is probably one of the most important concepts from this preliminary and fundamentally the eventual strategy we had, was identifying that all these multicolor bombs were functionally, well, artifacts. Killmonger goes in 7 archetypes because you're splashing. Kazar goes in all 10 because, again, you're splashing. Wolverine, Avengers Under Siege. I mean, Superhero Civil War. I had a draft at the camp where I just drafted blue-green, opened that card pack free, and just played it. Just had 1 or 2 duels, an Ant-Man's Army or something, or Undercover Scrawl, and just ran with it. And you need to, once you understand a card like the Superhero Civil War as an artifact card, it changes your perception of the format. So a slide like the previous slides in reality are alignment slide, but this is really the most important part, is how, when you look at the set, how does it strategically and structurally change in a way that you can explain really simply to a group of people, right? Because this is very easy to explain to most Magic players, that like these gold cards are functionally not 1 archetype, they're 7. Like Avengers Under Siege works in 7 archetypes. It's probably at its worst in black-white, but because once you say, like, do that, people perceive things differently. Especially as pod drafts get scrappy, this stuff becomes more important. You don't want to give up on power. You want to use as much power as you can get. So let's say you're in, not red green, but let's say you're in red blue, right, and you get Avengers Under Siege. It'd be a disaster to pass that, in my opinion. So you need to like aggressively take it, and make it work. So that was like an important concept for testing. And then yeah, after all of this alignment, I talk about the stuff we can discover. So, one of these things is that these white cards all were kind of overrated. They're not bad, they're just overrated. So I was talking about, like, one of the concepts to look at was, okay, well, can I ship other people in my pod into white with this stuff in order to gain access to better archetypes for my seat? Something to look at. I was discussing to look at the green shells, because this green shell of Ant-Man's Army, Rapid Rescue, and Undercover Scrawl kind of allow you to do what you want. Undercover Scrawl is a really high pick, of course, but Rapid Rescue isn't. Ant-Man's Army can come relatively middle to late. So, like, but if you have these cards, you're capable of doing anything. So it was a key shell for us to discover. Yeah, I used this image to make it clear. I was talking about Deep Golgari, like how the archetype has a lot of underrated cards that are quite good. Plus the Death Touchers work really nicely in the archetype. The red-black equipment shell, with villains, so Whiplash Swordsman with Hawkeye's bow was really, really nice. And a lot of these cards came super late. I mean, at the Pro Tour, while I didn't end up playing these cards, I did have some regret that in draft free I didn't position myself to. I guess I could have and had a better deck, but like, well, whatever. Like, things happens. But like the Swordsman and Whiplash were coming late, and I've seen them wheel, and I've seen other times wheel, and they are extraordinarily good in this kind of black equipment shell, especially like in red it works. Hawkeye's bow comes late. Wanted to explore this blue-black Delver shell. Never really came about in the end. It worked out in Team Seal because you have enough density, but yeah, just cheap cards with Visions of Villainy. Red-green Crescendo, so just cards that have modular costs that allow you to kind of flow your mana in one direction or another. That's why the Reptile's there, even though it doesn't look like it makes sense. Like, when you get like a big card off Crescendo or Crimson Operative, your turn is kind of locked into that card. Whereas when you get like a land or reptile, you just get to progress whatever you were doing. And I think that's really important. Oh, sorry. Then I talk about cards that like increased in performance in the hands of top players. I thought Panther Pounce was a really key one, just because it's a white card that comes late. So like, if you start in white and we expect white to be overdrafted, then that's the type of card you need to know is playable. Then I'm talking about essentially lure cards, so like people that are overdrafting or overvaluing these cards. They're fine, obviously, but they tend to be taken too high by top players, if that makes sense. And then I talk about best of free sideboard cards, like the Sentry, which is a great sideboard card, but unmain deckable. Like, there's just too many times that I've seen that card be hit play, and then the person who plays it loses on the spot. And then, yeah, Spider-Man, while I didn't like in main deck, is a nice defensive card if you're on the draw. and it is good in the green decks, like with the Death Toucher especially. That's a really nice 1-2 combo where, they attack early because they just want to trade off for your Death Toucher, makes sense, and then you play that and it's a disaster. And I mean, if they don't, right? You just play your free drop, it's fine. And then Hawkeye, Young, Avenger, depending on what you see in front of you. So yeah, anyways, I've used this slide before, that data is reliable, so that the team should be capable of using it. And then I talk about the objectives. So as usual, one of the objectives is always to search for a mission statement. That never changes. I don't expect it to change ever. It wouldn't make sense. But yeah, studying the archetypes of cards and discovering alternative builds, especially a late set. And then the pod draft dynamics, right? So we're looking at the white common uncommon clusters, which ones merit focus, which ones are best passed. When we adapt pick orders, right? When people are sharp, when they're doing what they're supposed to do, what is still going late around the table, right? Like, we're talking about these undervalued cards. Well, what's still undervalued, right? And we found that, like, indeed, Rapid Rescue still goes through. Those other cards late go through, but some didn't. Going late. The Black Equipment Shell. The archetypes that are resilient to table dynamics, right? Like, if your table starts going crazy and, like, changing pack free and other stuff, like, what, okay, that's fine. But what did you draft that, like, is not too much in danger of that? And then, like, yeah, how to best map the draft right to ensure the highest equity for anything you could open in future packs or get past. And then I use this from the last one for newer folks, but I was just talking about, like, how we do the drafts and stuff. Yeah, functionally, you can pause this if you want. I'm gonna move to the next one, but one of the things is I did do like a modern take on draft, like 2026 at the Magic camp for that I did at Vegas along with a number of other folks. I think they're gonna upload that session, so it's more generically like how to do draft reviews and all that. So I'm kind of excited when they share it. And then yeah, you'll get more info there, but I'll just leave that for you now. I'm gonna shift as a result to the main one. So the main presentation. Before I do, so this preliminary presentation's done. We do the pod drafts, we do the reviews. Things we notice. We notice that white is not performing very well, which doesn't surprise me, because everybody should know white as well is good. So, like, the questions were, why was it not performing well? Then we started looking at monocolor shells that were doing really well. We had a mono black deck that was great, mono red decks that were great, basically green, almost monocolor, and even a blue, and all of those decks were doing well. That was a discovery that was important. And fundamentally just making the drafts harder, right? So, like, we were seeing how the drafts are panning out when more difficulty was added to them. Something else that was important were there were a bunch of blue-green decks, and they tended to either do very, very well or extremely poorly. And it came down to, like, how the deck was built more than any. I think blue-green more than any other archetype in Marvel superheroes. Is one where the delta between a deck that's good and bad at first glance doesn't look that different. And I'll explain why when we get to it, but yeah. So anyways, we do all these pod drafts. I look at the data from the past week. I do all the card evals, sitting down. And at this point, it's kind of like, okay, all this info is collected, right? Like, we've done all of this. We've got all the info. What are we doing, right? How do we get a strategy for this set? Looking at the Pro Tour. So I sit down and I do that. And this is the first thing that my team sees as soon as we get into the content. Now, fundamentally, my thesis for this Pro Tour was that the set had been around for so long and that people would not be capable of escaping from the biases they saw or going too deep. It was kind of a two-part street. The people who, like, knew that draft was important for this Pro Tour would have done too many drafts online and been too biased into the white archetypes with, like, very little way to escape that is one. And the people who drafted too much and started looking at stuff that was really deep, right? Like we're starting to look at like almost like 4th or 5th tier sub archetypes. We're going too far, right? Like there was more opportunity just pulling back and doing something a little more standard. So between the two of those, it was kind of just a more solid approach. It was like just understand what's going on, but you don't need to go this hard into everything. I'm just gonna take 2 seconds. All right, cool. So that was the theory I had, was we would benefit more from letting our opposition make the mistake and for us to capitalize on the mistakes they made. We didn't think they would draft in a way that wouldn't allow. My view is they wouldn't draft in a way that would not allow somebody to understand what to do as a consequence. So I saw this, right? Like a lot of the format in the past week had these huge dips. If you haven't looked at the 17 lands graphs, the blue line is really what matters. It looks at the data like the past couple of days, and you can see this huge downward trend. And this one's for hero and training. But all the white cards were going down multiple percentage points on the last week or two. Like it was very hard to find cards that were just not going down in white. Whereas a lot of the other colors would stabilize. So the average win rate, I think, went down to 1.5 to 2% in that last week. But all the white cards were the loss. So this is the most information dense slide. I'm going to spend a bit of time there. I'm sorry this is not visually more appealing. Things I want you to highlight. One is that the power grade has flattened so much that there are no more A-class archetypes. Like, as in the set is balanced, with the exception of Izzet, which I'll get to. Because like Izzet and Rakdos have the same percentages, but they actually have a very different story. Izzet actually might be a D, and I'll get to that quickly. But it was like looking at the clusters of these different decks. It was like, what are you trying to achieve per archetype? And we'll go into more detail about that. But fundamentally, I was telling the team like for each one what to do. So like tempo value is functionally like just playing cards like hero and training or things that connive, scry, etc., while pushing board advantage. Black equipment shell is the swordsman, whiplash. Ronin shell with Stark Tech and other joy-filled things. There was the green do what I want shell. And then there were a few shells that were just a bit harder to get, like the white mid-range shell or the red-green combat winning, but that were still fine. Simic was particularly good, but mana maxing, what I mean by that is from turn like 1 to 10, you're using your mana at every stage, and there's always stuff to do. So the Simic decks that weren't performing well either had too much of an early curve and no way to use their mana properly in the later stages, or they had kind of too much of the late game and not enough of those. The power-up creatures are really important in Simic as a result. I would argue for Izzet, the one thing we might have missed on is there was a blue-red control shell, but it was more blue than red. So a lot of people saw the Izzet shell working as the red one, right? So you'd play like Stark Tech Executive, maybe the one free, stuff like that. The one free that pings, but actually it was more blue. So it's more a blue shell that's using Frozen in Ice, Trickster Stratagem, Biochemist, Hydraulic Helper, and combining with very few red cards, like the best ones, of course, Jessica Jones from Blast and Lightning Strike, but even stuff like Handshake found with Death to our enemies. So there was a shell in Izzet that worked, but it was kind of a control shell, and definitely much more blue focused than red focused. Just because you need like cards, right? Like if you need mana, you need that. But yeah, so this was the longest slide from a density perspective for the team. It was talking about the shells. This was really okay, we're going to dive into what the macro stuff is. But fundamentally, the format was more balanced once you got to pod. And I was talking about how the set works. So this is also quite information dense, but we'll go through it. The set is a classic tempo set. Each archetype expresses that differently, but it is a tempo set. The cards have variable costs, so that's really important because it explains why Hydra Infiltration is so good. It's because like in most sets, discarding 2 lands would be a non-issue, but in this set, getting to 5 or 6 mana, like to hit the power ups, is not like nothing. It's not trivial. So like discarding your extra lands is a problem. So being able to deny your opponent extra mana or preventing efficient use by the opponent of mana is quite valuable, right? Like if on their biochemist turn, the bold biochemist, right, you make them drawing 2 cards a bad proposition for them, that's really positive for you. So yeah, I talk about curves, right, that go like, because your 1 and 2 drops are functionally 5s and 6s. So plus you have to play the most powerful cards, which are 4, 5s, and 6s often. So that puts a lot of pressure. This pressure, right? You're essentially in a tempo mid-range set. Tempo mid-range is very bad for engine focused decks, right? So what I mean by an engine deck is that, you know, each piece helps the other, and while they are weak individually, eventually they overcome. The problem is all the cards were kind of individually good, and we're putting pressure on the opponent. It wasn't like they were good and buying time. It was they were good and putting damage. So engine style cards were like disruptible by removal, disruptible by unfavorable combat. So you usually didn't have time to set up engines, so it made the engines much weaker than they would normally would be in a set. If you ever approach a format, just try to think what the general axis of the format is, because it'll inform a lot of how the second archetype should behave. Now, top cards have high impact, but again, the commons can answer them. Even when you look at the superhero Civil War, Gorilla exists, and one thing we found was once you know that card exists, right, the Civil War, you can just not play your Gorilla on turn 2, just whatever other 2-drop you have, and just keep it for when the Civil War comes down, play it, destroy it. So like, there's a lot of these really best cards that are dealable with. Not all, of course. There's something like MODOK or Doctor Doom that are very hard to deal with efficiently, but the truth was that a lot of the top cards had commons that could just cleanly answer them, that were not just the counterspell, of course. For example, my second draft deck at the Pro Tour had a lot of discards. So the way I was beating, like Captain Marvel was not a card I could beat in play, but I could definitely beat it if I was making my opponent discard it every time, or discarding their 5th land. You know, those are like, you just have to think, how can I prevent my opponent from deploying their best cards as well? But yeah, so the big thing for me here, right, unlocking the highest equity in games involved using mana efficiently to get board presence, card flow, and disrupt the top half of your opponent's cards. Because every opponent is going to have that top half of cards. Otherwise, obviously, if their deck's not great, you're going to win anyways, so that's not too important. But that was something important, was effectively to think about this that way. This was an interesting interim, which I'll go into. If you're not in the 17 lands Discord and really like limited, I'd recommend you do so. There's not like a million posts in it, but there are some. And I thought this was interesting, how where the user that spent the most mana was just so far ahead in win rate. I knew it was favorable for the person spending more mana. I didn't think it was this insane. Like even a couple of mana above the next one, your opponent, like look at that win rate difference, right? Like if we're looking just plus like 1 to 4 mana extra is like 12 to 13% extra win rate. That's nuts to me in Strixhaven. So like it does talk about how important curving out in limited is. And why like drawing that extra 2-drop without like power up or something is a problem. So anyways, thought you might find that interesting. I did, certainly. So then after that interim, just because these were dense slides, right? So I'm trying to get like learning points through, and it's a difficult thing. I also think I made a mistake in the in how I structured the kind of, well, for lack of better terms, memes or image breaks, because this is a really information dense section with not too many breaks. But pod draft metagame. The good cards are taken. The best drafters are going to see those cards as colorless. Like if they take Khazar, they don't see themselves as green. They just see themselves as, I have this artifact card. Pack 1 will dry up. That happens all the time, but especially in, I mean, there's no reason you would get a good card in Pack 1. Now, white is perceived as the best and red the shallowest. So a default position for a lot, if they had no choice, would be to go for white and avoid red. One thing I warned my team about was that red is shallow. So like you can't really force it with late picks, because those late picks are just not really usable. So you're trying to some degree of caution. However, the self-correction and deck construction aspects, most archetypes can be excellent in context. So overdrafted archetypes in a pod struggle to function, right? Like, so the self-correction for the set was actually really powerful. Both once people properly evaluated cards, and from that fact of effectively, you know how to make each archetype work. So the leverage I gave to my team was that their fellow competitors are going to have psychological biases. That the data is biased fundamentally, right? Because we have seen that there's more blue-white drafts, so that like massively skews the generic data. So it creates sampling bias on that surface level data. So as a result, I just told them to be in the archetype that's open and has the highest wheeling equity. It sounds like a pretty generic strategy, and a little weird after doing so much work. But when you have a group of 20 people, right? Some are more experienced at draft and we're finding really cool archetypes, but they weren't something I could translate to the average drafter on my team. Like, I couldn't take what some of our top level creative drafters were doing and give it to the mid level, because those draft decks specifically leaned on very specific deck construction. So it was better to talk about how to be open in this set. And a lot of it, unlike say Lauren, where the best cards were clearly coming late, like the Merfolk Lord, if no one was in Merfolk, would just come to you last pick, right? Or like last wheel pick, because nobody could play it. This is different, right? The best cards can be taken by anybody. So you just need to be aware of where the archetypes are best. Depends what you open and get past. So it's a bit different in that sense. But this was fundamentally the draft strategy. It was, yeah, just be in your lane. Nothing special. A little bit reductive, I guess, in a way, but so yeah, talk about the dynamics. Players are going to start with the best card. Pack 1 is going to dry, but you need to take attention on the wheeling cards. I'm gonna approach that so you understand. I'm talking about like packs 2 and 3 having a lot more power because players are forced to make this deck work. So you're gonna get your color archetype cards coming to you, as long as they're not like inherently too splashable or too good. And then I talk again about this archetype knowledge around black equipment clusters, green open mana setups, combat assertive decks that are non-white, non-equipment. So that's red, green, and blue, black specifically. I thought those two were very useful to have awareness of. And then late picks that are archetype specific. There's a lot of the archetypes have good late picks. White black has the most, and white black was kind of an archetype that made sense to just keep in mind without forcing. I then use this to symbolize like what was happening in our pod drafts, right? Like our this isn't literally what happened, but there were close-ish, right? Like somebody gets a 4th pick Brave Brawler, they just look at the generic stats, so they're like, oh, white's got to be open, right? Because this Brave Brawler's here, and turns out it's not. It's just because there were free white cards before. So you end up in this really unenvious position here. And then as an example, right, I give an example. Some of the people on our team didn't want to draft white as a default. Not everybody, but some did. So the way I put it is, okay, let's say you're that person. How you do this is you can draft white, but only for the best of the best, so like the Captain Marvel. But otherwise, you're going to take anything else that is possibly available. So you take the best card. You use normalized archetype data, so you specifically only look within archetypes rather than generic. That's going to lean you down non-white decks naturally, because white cards have a performance premium in the generic data. You pay particular attention to the wheels, and then pack 2 and 3. Pack 2, you're making sure, yes, I'm where I need to be. And pack 2 and 3, I call it disrespect. It's like, the card's coming back because you're in the right seat. So you just ship it and get it back. And we were seeing that a lot in our pod drafts, was like one person knew they were alone in their archetype. So they just take whatever, let the archetype specific card wheel back to them. And like, it would just 80+% of the time be fine. So that's important. Talking as well about dual lands and land cyclers, just because you might open the best card in pack 3. But this was fundamentally the last big message I had for the team that was non-execution based, is that the opponents will have drafted a lot, and it is to their detriment. I felt that the average Pro Tour player would have drafted this set too much. and it's gonna, because the warped online metagame and perception was gonna create these biases that were gonna be really, really difficult for people to beat. It's really hard psychologically to beat biases. It takes training. You have to look into it. The best way to beat biases is to not go into them in the first place. If you're gonna, like, yeah, that's the easiest way. Just don't get biased is the easiest way to avoid them. But like, if people drafted online too much, they couldn't have possibly avoided them, in my opinion. So like, our team strategy was to essentially abuse those psychological and sampling data biases. All right. Now this is execution based. So I talk about pack one cards that are better. The uncommon lands, the Avengers Tower, Baxter Billy, and Villainous Hideout are fantastic. Truly exceptional cards. I talk about card flow. Again, the lands are here. They're just too good. I talk about different card flow. So these are just cards from the set that like help you flow to what you need. So like, what happens in pod draft is you often have these kind of aces and deuces drafts, right? Where, you know, the best cards can't be removed from a pack. So, you know, your Captain Marvel will be in your deck somewhere. But like, you only get one, right? So like, cards, if you're going to fill your deck up, it's usually better to fill it up with stuff that gets you to your best cards. So these help. And then I just do it per color. That's why the Operative and Crescendo are really good in red, is that they help in that direction. So these are, yeah, things that are not stonks. Any white card was going down. Raft Security Officer was a card a lot of the team liked, so I had to readjust them and tell them you can't take this card as high as you've been taking. Importantly here, I say that for the Pro Tour, if you're drafting white, if you're on the left side of these white cards, the Hero in Training, Web Up, Crusade, Triumph, you're what I would call the good side. Like, this is the stuff you want to do, are leaning to do, will work out for you. Whereas if you're taking the stuff on the right too early, so like, you can take those cards if you're in white or in white blue for the Captain America Living Legend, but like, you can't take them that early, right? Like, so the white drafters that are taking those cards too early were having the 0 free 1-2 records in their house, whereas the people taking more of the good stuff on the left were still getting good performances, and that was like a difference. Yeah. Then we look at archetypes: the Black Equipment Shell, the Swordsman, Whiplash, Ronin, US Agent too, to a degree, and Loki if you get it. And to me, one of the best black shells in the whole format. Just super versatile, super strong. Like, this is where I want to be in black if I'm drafting the set. It is uncommon based, so you can't always have it, but the shell is so good and the cards come late enough that it was worth the look in. I didn't talk about Golgari, how, like, I mean, all of these cards come super late. Like, Hydra Troopers is basically free. Hydra Infiltration isn't, but still quite good. Decoy Ploy is basically free. Call Damage Control as well. So like, Golgari is like this archetype where you can like almost ensure you're gonna get what you want. Another terrible meme, but I am quite proud of this one. I talk about this concept of freewheeling. So it's essentially, you take a card that's good, right? She-Hulk, Baron Strucker, Swordsman. And then either in that pack or the pack previously, or even the next one, if you took it early enough, you see a card that matches well. So like with She-Hulk, you get Blazing Crescendo because of the red-green archetype. With Baron Strucker, you get the Golgari cards, and with Swordsman, you get Hawkeye's Bow. So the way to look at it is, I take this card, and I'm paying attention to the wheel on the secondary card. So like, you're almost doubling up on your pick, right? It's like, I pick the first card, and then I get the second one almost guaranteed. Now, of course, that doesn't always work, but if the card doesn't come back, that's also kind of its own warning sign. But that's something I think that's important with the approach here, right? Is I'm not looking at the card in isolation. It's like, what is the card going to come with that can really help me? So like, if I have to decide between two colors, I know like this other card's coming back for me. All right. From here, it's all pretty much execution stuff. The challenge I had is I've never done this kind of simplified archetype mapping for the team before. I don't know why. It's actually pretty trivial to do this. So most colors, right, like devolve into 2 types of cards, maybe more. And they tend to pair best with another color. So like, this was a way to very simply tell the team, okay, when you're studying for the Pro Tour, look at these slides. And there's 5, one per color. And this is how you can map out the archetypes you want to be in, right? So if my early picks are like, the tempo white cards, I'd rather be in blue or green, right? I want to avoid red or black. If I'm in blue, if I'm like biochemists, right? Like stuff that makes aerial doombots, I'm more likely to want to be in green or red with the good cards, so the Jessica Jones of the world. Whereas the tempo side wants to be white and black. I'm not gonna go through all of these. I'll just do black. Um, Interestingly, black equipment shell works very well with white, blue, and red, but not green because there's no common green equipment. So like the green deck is more the I do what I want. I'm taking the best black cards, so we're talking removal often, and those late wheels. Red, then green. You're welcome to obviously like I'll put red a little longer, so you have an easier stop point, and then I'm gonna put green a bit. So again, you have an easier pause point. But that was the fundamentals of it, is teaching the team the execution of the set, telling them that like how their opposition is likely to behave, and then executing against their opposition's like training and psychology. We did well. I don't remember our exact win rate because we had a sister team, so it's a little harder to know the exact rate. It was, as far as I can tell, fine. Not our best, not our worst, but everybody else was trained, so I'm happy with the result. There's still a lot of material to go through. That's why I'm like breaking with the team stuff, but functionally, the important part with all of this is it's a lot of content, which makes sense because the set was late. But it's important to always remember that I'm trying to impress on the team more on the general side of it, and the execution stuff is for them to study a bit later after the presentation or in our drafts. That's why like a meme like this exists. I don't think it's wrong to put 4 or Wiccan in your deck, especially in pod draft where you're lacking cards. It's just that like you don't want to pick these cards early. You don't want your strategy to be revolving around them. It's like your 1/5 drop that you happen to have to play because it makes sense you got it late. But functionally it was about like deck construction. Keeping the curve low. So this is important. A lot of our team was psychologically worried about the creature to spell ratio, right? They were like, "Oh, I don't have enough removal. I need interaction." Blah blah blah. The main thing for me was to reassure them that functionally, because the set has so many creatures, a lot of the creatures act as interaction. If you think of something like giant-sized flying ant, that's interaction. It just happens to be on a creature. So like the thing is, the creatures are acting as interaction, right? Like a Death Toucher is interaction, right? In functionally against ground creatures. So like I think our team was too worried, and I don't think it's just our team. I think it was generally people were too worried on like this lack of interaction when really wasn't something to worry about. So I try to reassure them as best as I could. The rest of this stuff I won't read out too much. You can always pause, but I was talking about how to build the decks, and usually it's like lower curves because especially in a set with power up, right? Like all of your cards have future kickers, so to speak. So it's best to just have a low curve, some power up creatures being your expensive cards. That's much better. Obviously, like because you'll have some bombs that cost a lot, so you want to leave space for those. And the last point's important is like when for each archetype you need to know what the last cards are, right? So that you're avoiding free color disasters or very bad cards in your color pair. So that's where like the pan for pounce we discussed in the preliminary comes up. It's I'm drafting white. It's going to be shallow because everybody's fighting for white. But these two pan for pounces are going to wheel, and they're totally fine. And those are the last cards I want, right? Rather than the Spider-Man I fought for. Especially with like the white draft decks, execution is primordial because you have so little room for error in overdrafted colors. All right. Again, the rest of execution. So these were cards that are picked low but have high power. Hawkeye's Bow, Giant Size Flying Ant, Hydra Infiltration, Rapid Rescue. If you end up playing Marvel Superheroes Limited again in draft, these are cards that come late and are kind of good. I talked about cards that had decent power, so they're good fillers. So Giant Grove, Crescendo, Super Suit, Stolen Start Tech tend to come late. I found that the Pro Tour that Stolen Start Tech was no longer coming late. I think a lot of the teams had clued in to this card being actually pretty reasonable. The other 3 were pretty trivial to get though. identified cards. Beast is a little unique in that it's very rare to have a card that performs badly, perform even less well. So like it was minus 4 or 5% on top of how bad it started. And basically that was important to notice because it was telling me that like people were drafting white blue, white green, and we're like, oh, I need playables, so I'm just gonna play Beast or the thing, or right. It's just that I need playables, but in functionality, a lot of the times the 18th land is actually probably better than these cards. The point down where these cards are not as good as you think. They're fine. Just people were taking them too high for what they were. It's a little weird, the high priority stuff to have a 4 in it. I just wanted to make sure it was more that like the team was, some in the team were worried about drafting red. They're like, should I pass 4 because red is a bad color? And I'm kind of like, you can't do that because I mean, good or bad colors aside, for you're talking about one of the most powerful cards in the set. Like if I was going to play a color that is quote unquote bad, the best card in the set is a reason to do so. So it was to reassure them that it is worth taking like cards like this and worried less about the colors. But yeah, anyways, these are cards that to me are high priority gems, like really important in their archetypes. Wheel special, so these were cards that I suspected would wheel. Avengers Disassembled, maybe not. I figured even though red was likely to be avoided, it is really at its best against the white archetypes. It's one of the few cards that went up by a full 3 to 4 percentage points in the format, so it went from like kind of a whatever card to something actually really important, which kind of makes sense, right? If everybody's drafting these like white aggressive shells, it's really good. Baron Helmet Zero is Zemo is a free card functionally. Evil Thrall was also functionally a free card, but these cards are actually pretty reasonable in their shells. I talk about the Golgari specials like Hydra Troopers, especially Kingston Pin, Enforcer, Decoy, Political Damage Control. I'm not going to go through these. These are tables I do for top commons per archetype, top uncommons per archetype, and top commons uncommons per archetype. The reason I'm not going through them, you're welcome to like go back, pause a bit, check them, is this is really execution stuff for the team to like look at after we're done. I didn't do those for SOS because I ran out of time, and there were fewer archetypes. There was also less material functionally to actually look at, but these have always been historically useful for the team, and there's a reason why I keep doing some of the things like over and over again, even though I don't always find these particularly useful. I know a lot of people in the team do, so I keep doing them for that reason. Yeah, and then finally I talk about archetype value changes. So these are basically gold cards or secret gold cards, right? And which archetypes are these cards better? Like in an easy to check sheet. Yeah. So we're gonna go to the bonus cards quickly. The one thing about this that I love is the Airbnb we were at had this dog called Max, who's awesome. He was by far the best part of that Airbnb. We loved Max a lot. So anyways, if you don't know why I put graphic design as my passion, a lot of our team had trouble reading these cards. So functionally, I'm not going to go through these, but one of the important part, you can pause if you want. I'll go through them in a bit slowly, and you can pause to check them. But functionally, one of the things with these is that people worry way too much on scenarios that are way too unlikely. They're gonna like not know their common pick orders, but like go like, what if I open this special guest? These slides are for those folks. It's just the quick recap. Here's where things are at. Please don't put too much time or effort into these. Specifically, these slides I have a very much stricter don't converse policy on because they don't lead to very fruitful discussions. Except when, people ask the actual text on the card. They try to understand what's going on. That's fine. But it's just like these cards are so unlikely. I'll only like highlight them if something like important comes out. So for example, Fiery Emancipation is a really important special guest if you get it, because you literally, it's an incredible card if you're like basically mono red, which is not an unrealistic proposition, and no one wants it, so you might even wheel it. So like knowing about cards like that does have impact, but it's at most going to impact one drafter out of all 20 something that we have. And It's just good to know it exists, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. Sorry. So these are good ones, like ones you'd want to play. They might be better than good. Like the exact nature of their quality isn't too important. It's more the if you see this, you roughly know where you're at. Like you want this or not. And I don't put the ones that are bad. The ones that are terrible, I just don't put. I say like if you don't see it, it doesn't matter. So to recap, um, I don't think we did anything for this pro tour that we hadn't done in the past. I think our biggest difference is that our strategy was informed by the perceived psychological damage and biases that the set was imposing on our competitors in terms of top 8 draft, time the set was out, and all these other factors. So it's a very execution heavy presentation. But the important part of that, even an execution heavy presentation, is that it still maintains a low duration. Um, both the preliminary presentation and this one were an hour maximum because it's important, like 1 hour each, because it's important that like people can retain the information. So like I don't like going over an hour for that reason. It's just information retention. I think fundamentally we just had good archetype execution and psychological understanding of the field. Where things could have been better is it is true that on the creative side for kind of low end playables there was maybe a lack of exploration. Um, that I think especially for the drafters in our team that are a little more experienced, I think that's a pain point, right? Because they're like, well, I understand all this basic stuff, can you explain like more complicated stuff where I can get equity, right? um the truth is that people focus so much on these like 1 or 2% spots and just don't perform well on the more generic stuff, right? It's like, oh, you always see like the 2-1 deck that almost got there, the Frio deck that was like really weird and like, oh wow, this was great and all. And that's fine. But most of the time, most of these decks that go do well are just curving out, playing good cards, and just drafting correctly. And I could chase, I guess, that last 0.5, 1.5% equity, but it's really hard to do so without it costing the basics of it. And the basics are worth multiple percentage points. So that's kind of I mean, I could see it if the set was like 2 months old, or you're looking at like something like the limited championship coming up, then sure, because everybody is going to be so deep in the set that any equity is important. But on average at a pro tour, I just don't see it like as something we do. Um, and that probably is painful to, I think, like the most creative drafters in our group. But that's I think the nature of the beast, that we have a group that's large, and I just need people to understand what's going on. And honestly, just understanding what's going on properly is, good execution, good gameplay, will get you to the top of the standings anyway. So there's no need often to get that ludicrous on strategy. What's next? So, this was a bit of a weird set because it came so late. It's also weird because there's not an arena open with it, so a lot of you are seeing this are probably true fans of deep limited content rather than like looking for your own strategy in the set. But looking forward, I don't know how many late sets we'd have like this that would allow us to do psychological biasing against our opposition. That's actually, I think, kind of rare. Worlds is Star Trek Draft, which is a free day set, so that's going to be a very interesting challenge. That I would recommend to listen to the debrief, win or lose. I hope win, but it's new. So that's one thing. I think for the next Pro Tours, it's mostly semi-standard, like 2 to 3 week sets. That'll be more akin to what you might have seen last year from me, or so. Yeah. I think that's it for me for Marvel superheroes. If you're ever interested in limited content, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to discuss limited theory, strategy, etc. I hope this has been enlightening for you, especially if you're like handling people in your group. Even if it's not like a Pro Tour team, it could just be an LGS group or something smaller that like you're trying to do well in your LTQs. Always happy to discuss that kind of thing. So yeah, Thank you for listening. I do appreciate that you spend the time on this exactly 1 hour video. And yeah, take care all, wherever you are on the world. Have a great day. What is it? Morning, day, evening, or night?